Hey, church family. No, it's great to be able to engage in the Word again this morning or through church at home. But I'm excited to just have my friend Norman together with us. So thanks for being together with us, Norman.
Glad to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Norman and I served together in church ministry and on the same pastoral staff, and we went through some challenges, and we both have that smile and continue on. But it was great, great, and
allowed us to meet.
yes,
Become brothers.
blessing.
So.
Yeah, exactly. So it was great. No, appreciate that. But yeah, I just truly appreciate Norman's heart and his love for the Lord, and his love for people. And so it's we're bonded in that way, and it's great. Norman's a teacher, a pastor, in all these seasons of life, and God has used him in so many different ways. Written his book, Sixth Man, and a book about leadership, right? Is that and transformational leadership within through sports and the lives of these athletes that can actually live for something even greater using the platform of athletics. So did I get that right?
Yeah, that's
yeah, you're like sort of.
Yeah, that was a
but Norman's doing,
yeah,
he's coaching, he's impacting so many lives of students along the way, and I could testify to that. And, blessed to have him. So yeah, appreciate you being here, Norman, and we could just talk about some of these things that are going on. And so yeah, we just have some questions that we can just walk through. And
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So one of the questions we were talking about was this, from your experience, what have some of your struggles been being born and raised here in the U.S.? What's that been like for you?
Well, off the bat, I wasn't just born in the U.S. Obviously, I was born a black man, in this country, and I was born as an American of African descent. For me, I was not only born that, but I was also born not rich, so I was born into what I would classify as poverty, not gross poverty like I've seen overseas, when I got a chance to finally travel as an adult, but an American standard of poverty, inner city, and not abject, I mean, there was always people I knew growing up who were worse off than me and probably suffered from real food insecurity in a way that I didn't, but those were, one of those struggles, being born black in America. I wasn't really aware that was a struggle at first. Obviously, I lived in a community growing up for a long time that was primarily black. So my church and my school, my home environment, my family, everybody I interacted with primarily was, I was steeped in a lot of homogeneity. So I didn't really feel like that was a struggle, but obviously upon reflection, I would say that, that's part of the struggle of being born here was that I was born into a context that, that had a historical landscape of discrimination in this country that continued to ripple into my life, in the present at the time, being born and then moving through my growing up years. So as I got older, obviously I got more acquainted with that reality that was in fact a struggle. To be born black in America is to be born into a certain struggle. It doesn't mean that that's the end all be all. Obviously, it doesn't mean that you are destined to failure, but you are subject to some other things that I'll probably move into as we kind of move through some of these other questions. But that was one of them. I was born that, and then also, like I said, I was born into maybe a level of poverty, and some of that's because I had, I was a single parent household, so our margin was close, and we never owned a home, and I think I moved 7 times before I graduated from high school. At least 7 to 8 times, and for 2 of those years, we actually lived with a lady from a church that we began attending. When I was about 11 years old, we ended up homeless. A situation happened. We lived in Compton, California, for a little bit when I was younger, and just these are the kind of scenarios that tend to happen sometimes in urban settings. But my mom was paying rent to a landlord who didn't own the home anymore. So the home was foreclosed upon, and law enforcement came one Sunday and told my mom that we had 15 minutes to leave, and we were living in the home illegally, and so we were instantly homeless and ended up living with a stranger for 2 years, who became one of my dearest matriarchs. Actually, my aunt. I call her my Aunt May. But as far as struggles, from my experience, I think that I was born into a lot of contexts that subjected me to a level of poverty, a level of discrimination in this country, and being in an urban setting, in South LA, Compton, Inglewood, there's gang activity. So there some of those struggles included getting recruited by gangs, losing loved ones. I had two friends who were the victims of gang warfare and died before we graduated from high school. So and they were murdered. So these are things that you see. I saw these kinds of realities because of the reality that I was born into. Um, and that's kind of a snapshot. I mean, we were just talking about the struggle, of course, and not talking about all the great things I experienced as a kid, but those are
Sure.
certainly some of the struggles I encountered. And I just think um, no matter whose fault it is, it's just hard to grow up. It's hard to start life that way. I think we need our parents, we need our fathers. And for me, I was struggling to find some things, I think, as a young guy.
Mm.
But that's a little bit of a snapshot. I don't know if that answers the question. Does that answer the question?
No, yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Yeah, and then maybe as we look at sort of events now, or even in the last years or so, what's your heart for what's happening now, or maybe even the context of your life leading up to these points? How
Yeah,
does that impact how you're viewing things versus maybe the nation finally hearing now a little bit,
yeah. No,
whereas
it's
yeah,
it's very native to me. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. For me, I'm front loaded with the way I was born, or the world I was born into allowed me a context that is extremely familiar. When I
mm,
see certain types of scenarios. So, for instance, when you look at George Floyd, particularly, and people have in the days since his death, there are people obviously protesting worldwide who are calling for justice and calling for reform and the valuing of Black lives. But by the same token, there are other people who are saying they're denigrating his character, and they're saying, well, he was high when he was arrested, and um, he was no stand-up guy, he was no Boy Scout. And well, what I see is completely fixed into this kind of archetypal existence for anybody who's born into the struggle that I was born into. I look at him and I see myself. I look at him and I see all the times where I probably got away from I was a hair away from a negative police interaction because I knew how to speak articulately. I mean, I was able to code switch like I'm doing right now, right? I don't talk like this with the friends that are from my neighborhood, right? This is the King's English. So, and it's adapted, but not everybody has a command of that. Just being able to command your inflection and your voice, your intonation, to be less intimidating. I'm 6'5", and a lot of people are intimidated just at the sight of me. Not because I want it that way, but when you're George Floyd he didn't appear to be a small in stature guy, and he may not have had the wherewithal to be able to put himself in a position to have the best chance of survival if he was to, in fact, which he did, run into an encounter with a cop who was perhaps fatigued from years and years of dealing with you know less than exemplary individuals. Who knows? Or maybe he was a flat out racist and just had it in for this guy. But yeah, absolutely. My heart for what's happening now is housed in how I look at myself. I feel a great vulnerability, and my heart is that of, whereas the rest of the nation, many people in the nation this might be a new upload for them. But for me, I've seen brutality with my own eyes in my own context. Growing up in Los Angeles and Inglewood, I've seen police make men put their hands on a hot hood of a car that's been running all night and tell them, don't move, threaten these men, threaten them with bodily harm, and that's of course, all cops aren't that way, but I recognize these kinds of things. So when I see with my own eyes a man put his knee on the neck of another man, forget about what color they are. When I see one man put his knee, I know that is a move of dominance. That is an attempt by one man to completely humiliate the spirit of another man. He's trying to take his manhood from him and emasculate him. He's trying to remind that man and all of the onlookers who have their phones out in broad daylight that this isn't a man at all. This is an animal, and I'm going to treat him as such. And there's nothing anybody's going to do. There's nothing more, to me, self-aggrandizing and peacocky, for lack of a better way of putting it, than to literally put your foot or your knee on another man who has his that is in a vulnerable position. It was complete dominance, and it was a move that I recognized, as somebody who's been condescended publicly, and when at times in my life where I have felt that was done because I'm Black, I was, being an athlete in college and stuff, oftentimes people don't assume that they assume that you're only in college because you play a sport, and they'll say that sometimes, you're in the basketball team, right? Or, they assume that you're not there on your own merit, or, I'll be other places I've been throughout my life, and I've been asked if I can afford the thing that I'm attempting to buy. I'm at the LA County Fair years ago, and I was looking at one of those massage chairs, you sit in that everybody like wants at home. And the woman literally asked me if I said, can you tell me a little bit about this chair? And she proceeded to tell me that she said, well, it's just that it's a really expensive chair. And I don't know. I mean, can you afford a chair this expensive? And I remember the interaction I had with her wasn't friendly. I mean, it was friendly enough for me to not get arrested, but it was, I was no longer interested in the chair she was selling.
Still pastoral answer though, right?
Yeah, right. Sorry, it's Sunday morning. So, but my heart for what's happening now is really a place of depth for me. I'm grateful. That's one of the emotions I feel right now in this place. My heart for what's happening right now is that I don't just see negatives; I actually see an opportunity. I think it's a serendipitous moment for the world and for God to really speak in a way through His ambassadors to the world, because the world's heart is tender right now. The world's hurting. Not everybody. There are some people who have a pretty diabolical spirit going on, but man, I've seen tears come from so many different types of people related to this, and it's just about humanity. And I think my heart is to kind of see the restorative humanity, the redemptive work of God, and Jesus Christ really come into this space to bring that solidarity to people that is often missing because we tend to lack empathy in this world. So for me, that's my heart.
Right. No, I appreciate that. No, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I love hearing that about just it seems like the opportunity that we have right now. It seems like a more tenderness to actually listen and hear. Maybe what are some of like the systemic issues that you see that maybe we can start to break down or break down the walls that have been there that, or maybe we don't even know, maybe are there systemic issues that we don't even know of that we bring into it that we don't even realize is there, that maybe from your point of view, like, no, it's there. You're just not seeing it,
Well, I think with any type of oppression, systemic or otherwise, it's always most apparent to the victims of it, So right. Obviously, there are going to be some things I think that people outside of the Black community have maybe missed or maybe have heard about, but didn't necessarily see with their own eyes. I think racism in its own, just in the basic understanding of what it is very foreign to a lot of people. Right. I mean, you can see, and racism is a kind of an elusive term, right? Because really, technically, human race. That's it. We're all humans. That's a race. Right. There really isn't this distinction, this man-made segmentation, but yet, the way we understand it, we tend to look at culture, ethnicity as synonymous with race. And so we end up kind of equivocating where we give an equality to the meaning of those words. But just to your question, obviously, when you talk systemic issues, it is rooted in a lot of the things that I think that you and I have talked about. Patterns, perceptions, actions, biases, reactions, policies, all these things. But the question is, where do those biases manifest? And my wife Jennifer and I, we did a survey tonight, and we sent it out on for a group page that we started on Facebook,
Right.
called A Tribe Called Change. And I think they designated about 5 to 6 categories, for the execution or the carrying out of the systemic issues that kind of plague this country from the start. And they are, areas like education, housing, law enforcement, and the judicial process. So, like, for example, the judicial process, or just the reality of the judicial kind of reality for Black men in this country, is that Black men constitute about about roughly 6%. I'm just talking about guys that look like me. 6% of the nation's population. If the nation has about 339 million people, and Blacks altogether make up about 42 million, about 48% of those 42 million are African American men, which would give you about a little less than 20, somewhere around 19 to 20 million, or maybe around 20 million African American males, but 1 million of those are incarcerated. And we tend to be incarcerated at a rate about 5 times the rate of whites. So when you look at a systemic issue, an issue is always something that can be studied and researched. An issue is something that is, you look at it and you go, that seems to be problematic, because how does a group of people that constitutes 6% of the nation's population, when you put them with brown brothers, when you put Hispanic and Black men together, they constitute roughly, I want to say about 38 to 40% of the nation's incarcerated. No, I stand corrected. About 56% of all the inmates in this country are constituted by 38% of the population. That's crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
So the rate of incarceration, that leads us to some assumptions that are not really good assumptions, right? I mean, you can easily move into the space of, say, seeing the Black man, for instance, as hyper violent because he's incarcerated at such a high rate. You begin to think, well, natural correlation is Black men are doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Ergo, they belong in jail. And if something is wrong, they're not helping their own cause, right? But systemically, where that paradigm is flawed is that we haven't done the work to consider the logic. And logic involves reasoning, not assumption, right? So when we think about like the rhetoric of argument, the way that how do we make a case for anything that we're trying to kind of argue from a standpoint of trying to prove that something is or isn't, you have to sometimes work backwards, right? So one of the issues I see with, say, the judicial process and incarceration and how we view that and how we view Black men is that we don't, in this country, we're not very tenacious about sourcing things. And as Christians, sometimes I find that the Christian community tends to jump off of the scholarship train because it's easier to just say, well, live by godly principles and you won't have to worry about jail. But the reality is that we live in a country that had slavery introduced to it before it was a country and before it had established all of its colonies. So in the early 17th century, slavery was already here. When settlers procured slaves from a pirate ship that had taken slaves off of a Portuguese vessel that was a slave trading vessel. So you've got from 1619 to 1863, more than 150 years of slavery until until emancipation ended it. That's 12.5 generations of people who were destined for slavery. Every time they gave birth to someone who had only really the hope of being a slave or hoping to defect from a slave state and hoping to find freedom. So it's like, a conversation I had, sorry to draw this out, but a conversation I had with a friend of mine today, earlier today, we talked about this. And I said, when you think of a systemic issue, you always have to look at an incarceration rate in 2020, but you always have to go back and trace bloodstream. And so I kind of likened it to this. I said, imagine if for the whole of your life, however old you are, you had never gone one day without using methamphetamines or using you know, some extremely, heroin, a highly addictive, highly destructive drug that wreaks havoc. You know, we could go less lethal, and we could say, just, well, imagine if breakfast, lunch, and dinner you had a tall can energy drink. You had a Monster at breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day for the entirety of your life. I'm 44 years old, so that'd be 44 years of drinking jet fuel. I say, is it possible to expect to be healthy? Would you expect to be healthy if you had spent your entire life being toxified? And it's like, that is the nation. The nation has this nation, for all of its good things, it built itself. It started in a way that it didn't have to start, and because of that, it put a group of people in a position where it took their fathers out of their homes and did some heinous things to these men. You read the slave narratives, and you find that these men were burned in public to prove points to the other slaves. They were auctioned off. They were targeted. Men that looked like me were targeted because in warfare, you have to eliminate the men first to reduce the possibility of a threat. So these slaves were often punished in some of the most gruesome ways you can imagine. Horses tied to their limbs, and then those horses run off in one direction and literally tear that body apart in front of other slaves, in front of family members, in front of community members. And so systemically, we have to start with that. So when we look at incarceration, that's a factor. We look at education, and the reality of a school to prison pipeline. Once an image is set of a group of people, say like in the early 20th century with Birth of a Nation, where you are portraying Black men as brutes, as Neanderthals, as subhuman, rapists and murderers, and you are for people who have never encountered an actual African American person, they are left to their own imagination to build a mythology about a hyper-violent, hypersexualized male who has dark skin, and so that begins to be the template, and that impacts what we call implicit bias. And there are trainings now that they do for law enforcement on implicit bias, not in every agency, but these things spiral very quickly, John, as I'm sure you know. And so then people don't want to rent to Black people throughout the 20th century and 21st century. I've experienced it myself when people didn't want to rent to me. I go through the processes. I submit my bank statements. I got money in the bank. I can prove that I can pay my rent and or pay my mortgage or whatever the case may be. And I still have had people discriminate and basically say, well, can you do this? And they're adding steps. And I've done everything. And in one case, if I hadn't had a white realtor, I probably don't get the place to live that I want to live. And I did everything. I did all the things. I've never been to jail. I actually haven't been to jail. Can you imagine how hard it would be for a Black man who has been? So when we look at systemic issues, they really are intertwined. There's an intricate matrix of discrimination, and there is a structure in this country that has not been disassembled yet. And we can over spiritualize that, and we say, yeah, but we just want to trust God. God said, God has made us his ambassadors, as if making his appeal for him. If we don't fight for justice, then that's extremely, and to me, an abdication of not only our responsibility as human beings and Americans, but as followers of Christ. 1 John 2, verse 11 says, but anyone who hates a brother or sister is in the darkness and walks around in the darkness. They do not know where they are going because the darkness has blinded them. Darkness is profuse in this world. And I think that is very, very much, fall-headed right. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but these, in fact, are the systemic issues, are the principalities. These are the darknesses. And these are some of the things that we deal with, and I'm just kind of iceberging it right now, tip of the iceberg. But
I appreciate that. And as we talk about that, I mean, then how do we, as believers, try to exemplify biblical love, biblical equality? Sometimes we don't even understand the definitions of biblical love and biblical equality. We're trying to even understand that. But how do we stand up for that? How do we shift a gear so that we can stand up for that, and specifically for Black Americans in our country, and to not just cast it aside, but to actually stand for that? How, in your opinion, how do you think we can do that?
Well, I think that it, the I know that there, it's tough to engage maybe a group of people that we may not be familiar with. For some of us, when for the diaspora of African Americans throughout this country, if you live in a place where there's not a high concentration, it can be tough to even gain perspective on a personal level. But I would say that I think it's important to be open to that, and not that it has to be forced, but to be open to interactions and to be honest about perceptions that a person may have developed early on about black Americans, or just black people
Right.
in general. Because if we're really being honest, um, you know, there is a diagram I reference a lot called the Pyramid of Hate, produced by the Anti-Defamation League, and at the base of that pyramid is is a level that is very kind of unknown to a lot of people. That it's the biased attitudes that we have, that we're taught sometimes by our families. And like for
Right.
me, I didn't really trust whites. I was taught not to when I was a kid. And at some point, I think we have to examine what we've been taught, and we have to understand, like, am I afraid, to talk to that certain group of people? Do I have
Right.
prejudices within me? It's not, you don't have to announce them. It's like you don't have to take to Twitter and say, this is my confession.
Right.
I've been a
Right.
bigot my whole life and didn't know it. It's
Yeah.
like, we don't have to do that. But I think the first step for standing up for biblical love is to do self work. I think that some of the best work that we can do is to examine self first, and to be honest, and let God sit with you in that space. That's why I'm a huge fan, always have been, probably since our time, even at Grace. You may remember some of the
Yep. Yep.
spiritual formation things that I
Yep.
was really trying to get our young people to do, and really valuing the time in silence and solitude. Learning how to not always feel like you have to not always feeling like you have to have your Bible in your hand to be spiritual. For most of us who've been in church our whole lives, there's probably enough scripture in us coursing through our conscience, that we do well to sit in silence and to get away from the noise, and to find ways to kind of like ask God to enter the space with us and show us where we might in fact be ignorant on not on a certain subject, but when it comes to maybe the sensitivity that we're supposed to have. So I would say first step is inward work. But once we move into just actionable things, I really think that biblical love and equality, if you're kind of campaigning on part of other people, the best thing you can do is to kind of educate yourself the way your just this conversation is a means of informally kind of coming to an understanding about some of the plight that exists. It's like for me as a man, if I really want to understand what women face in this world, I not only have to talk to women about the struggle, but I have to study. I mean, that's something I like to do anyway. I have to. I've learned a lot about the vulnerability from birth to death. Women are the most vulnerable group on the planet, hands down. And so I think one of the second step after a person has kind of examined themselves is to kind of the two-part education of building relationships with people of color, and namely with Black people, and not being prepared for rejection, because quite frankly, a person may not be receptive, but that doesn't mean you can't be open to it. And then studying, there's so many great documentaries, that will, it's not that a documentary is the end all be all, but like the BBC has done a great documentary called Racism. And it's really just a historical kind of a panoramic of the history of racism in the world, and how it's kind of like dovetailed, how it came to be really centered on dark-skinned people. It's a 3-part series, and it's by the BBC. Then there's the documentary called The 13th, which is on Netflix.
Right. Yeah.
There are lots of great. Yeah, you've seen that. There's a great movie I just watched with Michael B. Jordan. Me and my wife watched last night, called Just Mercy. Right now you can rent it for free, I think, because all this stuff is going on.
Right.
Prime is trying to rope you in, but it's a good movie, and it's little things like this that help to kind of bring a reality to um, the plight, and I think education is key. It's not just a head thing, but the heart will follow when we begin to expose ourselves to things. And I'll say this, like this is just my opinion, but a lot of people have said, when I found out about George Floyd, I couldn't even watch the video. I couldn't even watch the video. I submit to you this, that this might be a useful piece for the notion of biblical love and equality. Sometimes in life, you have to watch it anyway, even if it's painful. You have to watch it anyway, because whether it's the movie 12 Years a Slave or something else, and you have to understand that for blacks, they haven't been able to avoid it. They don't get to choose whether or not to feel these things. It's not optional for us.
Mm.
So when we think of gross discrimination, in the same way, it's not optional for a Guatemalan refugee. And I have refugees that I teach who come from Honduras, who come from Egypt, who come from Syria, who come from the southern Philippines. And one of the things, or who come from Juarez, Mexico, where the cartel's doing all the dirty work. Like, when a person is a victim of something, you have to understand that they if they're in your presence, they have probably narrowly escaped being an ultimate victim. So when you get into that space to try to partner with them, it can't be remote. It can't be the osmosis. Tell me your story and I'll feel it. I mean, that'll move you, but you got to be willing sometimes to get into the graphic stuff and be uncomfortable, because you have to understand these people have lived this stuff for much longer than the exposure you may have gotten. And I would say that that's true for me, to understand the Asian community and the things that they've been through. I had a Vietnamese colleague in college who worked on the school newspaper with me, and he literally came over on a boat. For as much as people joke about boat people, he was one. And I probably never met a more driven, intelligent person than Hugh in my life. But man, for him to tell his story and for me to watch documentaries about people who the risks that people take just to get to this country, it changed everything. My wife used to work at a high school in El Paso, Texas, and she had kids who came over that border every day to go to school, and they would have pictures on their phones of heads hanging from bridges because the cartel had exacted, revenge or retaliation to people, and it was horrible. But sometimes, I would say that in that education, in that visceral, you got to get there, and I think that's the starting point. After that, the action points, John, really just have to do with understanding what, like if we're looking at the stream of injustice related to law enforcement, then I was saying to your group, I think last night, just then we're moving into, okay, how can I link up with the concerns that are being expressed by advocacy groups like Black Lives Matter or a local chapter of it, or some of the partner groups that are affiliated. It might be a local NAACP chapter. And it's not that you have to march with them all the time or that you need to follow everything they do, but if they're focusing on the use of force policies in local municipal police forces, then it's like, what can I do to learn more about what's being done when a cop pulls over an African, really pulls over anybody? What's their policy? Learn about the data, their arrest data. Are they a high accountability police force? Have they been trained in de-escalation? Do they have a proper system of review and accountability for their officers? This is when you're showing real concern, and that's kind of all we can do, right? I mean, it's a numbers game in America, and you have to go vote, and you got to understand your candidates and where do they stand on educational equity, housing, the judicial system, law enforcement, all of these things, and I think that, when you have a highly motivated swath of people who are also intelligent and spirit led, man, you can't lose. So
Yeah. No. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think that's huge. And I think, for me, I think just the time that we've had together, like you were saying, just being able to learn and hear and listen, to be able to hear your story. And I think just remembering back when you were telling me, like, most people have a flag that they can point back to as part of their heritage. These are my people, whether you're third, fourth, fifth gen, or whatever it is, you have something to point back to. But you were sharing with me, like, what do I have to point back to? And and you were sharing with me your last name, right, was is Coulter, right? Uh, is that what you were saying? Is that it was the slave owner of your great grandfather? Was that or
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
My grandfather's grandfather was a slave, to my knowledge,
yeah,
and Coulter was the name that was it was his name, but it wasn't. You know what I mean?
right,
It's
right,
like we
sure,
don't
sure,
know,
right, right,
our original surnames are lost. That identity. So,
yeah, yeah,
in my I
right,
wish I had a picture of my room I could put on the screen right now.
yeah,
I don't want to waste time, but my classroom, I have flags from probably more than 50 countries. Um,
yeah,
some of them are countries I've been to, and I have this rule in my class that um, no flag goes on the wall unless it comes directly from the soil that it represents, And
yeah,
until just now, I never thought about the fact that um, I've never talked to my class and made that association that for all the flags I have up there, I don't know which one is mine. I don't know which one. I have some African flags, in my classroom,
sure,
but I don't know if they're the ones that represent, my ancestors who actually were brought over in captivity. I don't know. I don't know
sure.
which flag belongs to me. So that is a reality. Yeah,
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah. No, so I mean, I think those things are powerful things. But I love, just even in our dialogues of the power of Christ, right? The unity that we have,
absolutely.
and the bond that we have and the home we have in Christ. And so, yeah, I mean, that is the end all. And that is, the power that is within us, Christ in us. But that doesn't diminish the context within which we come to that body. And
Hmm.
so I think, man, I just appreciate you sharing, helping us, navigate that a little bit.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I
it's
don't.
it's a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
I appreciate you too, John, and I like that what you said a second ago about just the context by which we come to um, the fullness, the Christ kind of like the what's the word I'm looking for? Just like when we find our home in Christ, obviously, ultimately, that is my solace. You know what I mean? That is my home base. That's my the redemptive value of the struggle. But not every black person is a Christian. Not every black person is ever going to be one. Necessarily a follower of Christ. So sometimes there's a double dip of evangelism that occurs as we not only learn more about, say, black people, for instance, as a non-black person, but you're also able to show kindness and show gentleness and really demonstrate the fruit of the spirit at work, and it
right,
does require patience. I mean, joy can sometimes be kind of just evident at a time where people are mourning and stuff. That's helpful, but you know, love, peace, patience, being able to long suffer with us, all of these things are a great witness. You know,
yeah, yeah.
Before I forget too, like this is a book that I came across a long time ago,
Right.
called Inhuman Bondage. It's um, a historically critical book written by a historian, a guy named David Brian Davis, and it's just about the rise and fall of slavery in the New World. Um, it's just one of those great contextual books that helps, I think, to understand kind of the landscape. It's kind of heady, but it's the kind of stuff that you got to do if you really want to understand something that's out of your scope. So
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. So, well, right on, Norman. Appreciate you so much. Just
appreciate you,
taking the time
man.
to share with us, and it's good to just chat again. And I don't know. I didn't ask you ahead of time, but I don't know. Would you be willing to pray for us for the time and for just what the Lord has laid on your heart, the burden, and if we can just share in that burden with you, if you don't mind just
Yeah, yeah,
praying.
yeah. Thank you,
Well,
man.
okay.
We'd love
All right.
to.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
Thanks, Norman.
Yep. Well, Father God, we come to you because we trust you. And as we come to you today, Lord, as my brother John has, we kind of fallen back into a relationship. Our relationship never faded, but I'm just thankful for this opportunity today to be a part of the sharing. And Lord, our heart today is, while it is broken and it is healing, we are, we know that our hope is found in you. And there is a ministry of reconciliation that we've been given, because you are the ultimate reconciler, bringing back into harmony things that are cacophonous and confusing. We know that love is the ultimate um, conjoiner of people, for all of the differences that man uses to destroy each other. We are actually bonded through the love that you have for us, despite all of the of humanity's negligence and defiance, our disobedience. Lord, your word says that nothing can separate us from your love. We're grateful for that. We're grateful that although that there is none on the earth that does not fall short of the glory of God, we all do. We all sin and fall short, and yet you promise that when we reckon with our sin, when we take a look at our frailty and really see ourselves for what we are, that is the thing that pleases you. The Bible says that without faith it is impossible to please God, and he that comes to God must know that he is, and that you, Lord, are a rewarder of those who diligently seek you. So I think it's in this seeking, God, that we are asking for your covering, asking for your discernment, asking for a fresh filling of your spirit, asking for you to invade our presence, God, and give us the wherewithal, Lord, to not focus on or be stagnated or paralyzed by all of the evil, but to understand the triumphant nature of the loving heart, to understand that the key to ending all of this was to truly allow your spirit, always to allow your spirit to permeate our courageousness, to make us courageous where we are cowardly, to give us a sense of empathy where we are perhaps ignorant, and that's for us all, to give us eyes to see, as you did when you were on the earth, Lord, as you saw that people were like sheep without shepherd, and you reached into the world of people, and you healed the sick, and you preached, and you said what needed to be said, and ultimately made the sacrifice of love for us all. So we're grateful that we might live as such, Lord, that we might find ourselves in you, as it were, once again, and give us the actionable items. We know that sometimes that gets political in this world, and that we have to be active agents for justice in ways that maybe are not as comfortable. But Lord, I pray that you would help us to even do that, and that you would give us a heart of awareness, a mind to make ourselves educated about officials and even policy where needed. God, just quicken us to all of the things that we need to be made aware of, and help us, God, Lord, to most importantly, to never stop praising and worshiping you, because that is the strength. I feel like, God, we forget to do that. I forget to do that. And yet you are the way, truth, and life, that by which we can actually stand together. And so we give you great praise today, Lord, for all that you are. We're reminded that you are not intimidated by these circumstances, Lord. We pray that you continue to heal the sick, Lord, as we fight COVID-19 as a global society. And we look forward to being able to come together again and rejoice in the work that you will have done through your children. It's in your son's name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Oh man, thank you so much, Norman. Appreciate
Thank
you.
you, man. This
Yeah,
is great, man.
it's been good.
I'm in trouble now, man.